Hi, I'm really pleased to introduce Rebekah Brennan, who's written considerably around the use of human enhancement drugs. Hi, Rebekah.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Great. I wanted to come
here.
Oh, great. I mean, your area, it's quite unusual, some of your work. You touch on some areas that not many academics have actually really investigated. So I'd like to look at those things. And I thought, in particular, your work around Melanotan. And you first published on this, it's probably about eight years or so ago. So, it was relatively early on in the, I suppose, the increase in use of Melanotan.
Yeah.
And you did a few different approaches. Tell us about the different methodologies that you've used.
Well, I think the first publication that I had in relation to Melanotan was a case study. So this would have been in the very early stages of when people were becoming aware of this practice. So what we did, and my co-author was Marie-Claire von Hout. So what we did was we interviewed an exotic dancer. So she had no prior drug injecting experience whatsoever. She didn't identify as an injecting drug user or anything like that. So she was actually introduced to injecting Melanotan through peers. And her motivation was really because when she was at work as an exotic dancer, things like, fake tanning products and things like that would just off in the heat of the lights. So it was more logistically appropriate to use the tanning injections. And the harms that she experienced were very minimal. I remember she was quite responsible in terms of looking after her health. She was checked over by nurses quite regularly for, changes in moles and things like that. She was really had a high level of awareness in terms of safe injecting practices. So she didn't use needles twice. She kept her project refrigerated. She disinfected her areas where she injected. And she managed her side effects with things like benzodiazepines, which I think that was probably one of our more interesting findings. But it was all about really perceived attractiveness associated with this darkened skin tone. So that was an interesting case study that we did. I suppose the fact that she was an exotic dancer gave it a little bit of an unusual twist to it. After that, then
how was she? Sorry to interrupt. How was she introduced to Melanotan?
Through her peers, other exotic dancers.
Right.
Yeah.
So there was a group of them.
Yeah. So they would say, look, stop using fake tan. It doesn't work as well as this. If you go on the sunbeds 3 times and use Melanotan each time, you'll have your base tan basically after 3 uses of a sunbed, which for anyone that's ever used tanning beds will know you need to use them a lot more than that to get a deep tan. So, I mean, that you can see how that could be attractive to somebody who's used to using sunbeds or that's interested in tanning, the convenience of it.
Yeah.
And the efficacy of it as well, and the natural look of it. And I know a lot of people at the time were talking about how people use Melanotan to achieve these kind of really extreme results. I didn't come across anyone throughout the course of my research that used it to the extent that they looked like they changed their race, for example, or looked at because a lot of people talked about that at the time. There was a lot of discourse about Melanotan at the time, these really extreme pictures before and afters. I didn't come across anybody that had used it to that extreme. I came across people that were using it to achieve the same type of tan that you would achieve a 2-week holiday in Ibiza, or it was nothing really extraordinary that would catch your eye.
One of the concerns that I think people have had is this has been a group of naive injectors, naive in the sense of them not having used before. Did it introduce them to other enhancement drugs at all, or were they just sticking to those the skin tanning side?
Well, and my PhD was a big piece of work, and I have to say, of all the drugs that I looked at, the use of tanning injectables was probably one of the ones where the data was most limited.
Right.
I didn't get a lot of data on Melanotan in my PhD work. Just the same findings, really. Like there was I was focusing on the emotional relationship with injecting amongst all the PED injectors. Like, what did injecting mean to them around stigma and things like that? And the findings there were similar to, say, women that were self-injecting Botox and dermal filler kits, which was more around the creation of their, what they considered an attractive look. It was less about conforming to mainstream body ideals and more about autonomy and, selfhood, things like that. But I'm not sure that Melanotan, I don't like the term gateway drug anyway.
No.
But I'm not sure Melanotan, from my work, that I could call it something along those lines. Other performance and image enhancing drugs that women use, like, for example, clenbuterol or other Anavar, things like that. They're less popular. The side effects are more extreme. The side effects with Melanotan are not that extreme. With the injecting, that you can get a flushed face, you can get vomiting and nausea, but people are tending to move now to the nasal sprays. And the symptoms with the nasal sprays are so much less as to be almost, undetectable. Like, I've spoken to people that are using nasal sprays all the time, even on sunny days in Ireland, which aren't that sunny, getting good results and not having any side effects whatsoever. Now, we don't know long term, obviously, will that still be the case? But I did a review a couple of years ago of clinical trials and clinical case presentations. And they did have a look at some of the less serious and the serious and more serious side effects. So some of the side effects were like the obvious ones: nausea, darkening of existing moles, and yawning. But there was also more serious side effects, systemic toxidrome and melanoma.
Right.
But from a scientific perspective, I think causality there is quite limited, determining causality in those cases, because we couldn't, the clinicians couldn't really account for polypharmacy with the systemic toxidrome. And also the melanoma is there where people are using tanning beds in conjunction with Melanotan. So how can you determine which was the instigator for the initiation of that disease? The side effects in clinical trials were largely minor. But again, the long-term health outcomes are as yet undocumented, so we need more research in that area.
But so from a public health point of view, one of our main concerns was around people injecting unknown substances. So it's got to be a positive thing, the nasal preparations, and that is been a major change, I think, in the last 5 to 10 years. You mentioned there about over injecting, and I suppose your work is one of the few to have a look at not just the drugs being injected, but the injecting practices themselves. And while there's been work done around injecting with psychoactive drugs and some of the relationship with injecting, what did you find in that work that you did?
That was the main focus for me of my work, because what was really interesting to me is that people that inject psychoactive drugs are heavily stigmatized in the general population, and it's just really interesting when I investigated people who inject non-psychoactive drugs and whether, you know, what were going to be the similarities and differences there. So what I found was that there was this cognizance of discrimination in wider society towards injecting PED use. So people knew what wider society may have been saying about injecting steroids, but within the community, this micro normalization occurred, and particularly within the discussion forum space, which is a community in itself. Whereas if you compare that to, say, there's a great book called The Sociology of the Syringe. I don't know if you've ever read it, but it's by Nicole Vitellone, where she talks about how people that inject psychoactive drugs, they tend to absorb the stigmatization of the wider population. So they tend to stigmatize, they tend to self-stigmatize, whereas this didn't happen within the PED injectors. So like there's an emphasis in the anabolic steroid community, which is placed on freedom of choice, on autonomy over your body and your own health care. And individuals who inject PEDs hold strong beliefs that they should have the freedom to make informed choices with regard to their own health and bodies. So I think the kind of prescriptive moralism, you know, this expectation of conformance to social health norms, that doesn't work with people. It doesn't work with people who inject drugs in general, but particularly people that inject PEDs. They should be seen as people who are rational individuals. They're exercising their free will, and they're upholding their human rights to choose a particular course of action over their own bodies. So, like, emergent from my data really were these new theoretical concepts of selfhood through injecting. The relationship with the syringe was something really interesting. You know, and that was gendered as well. So, like, central to that theoretical framework was this concept of injecting as a tool to negotiate a gendered identity. And that's, like, if you think about it, injecting is a skill in itself, because like there's a right and a wrong way to inject, as we know, as you know, Jim, you know, like as you're trying to teach people to safely inject, you can inject in a way that harms you, that can cause skin and soft tissue infections or worse. So it is a skill in itself. So through this skill kind of acquisition and refinement, that can give people a sense of empowerment and a sense of mastery. And that came through in the data. And that contributed to this theory of conceptualizing the individual who injects PEDs as individualistic, autonomous, and innovative in the way that they navigated those injecting risks and just refined their skills in injecting safely.
Yeah, I mean, I think your work really gave sort of body and theoretical basis for things that I suppose we talked about a lot around that empowerment that people can, that's of empowerment, of having control over how you look, and in a world where many things we have little control over, you know, with that dedication and investment of time and effort, you can have that. So that was fascinating. You've also you did some work around Botox as well, and when we talk about enhancement drug users, we sometimes, I suppose, forget to, we don't always include them amongst injectors, and of course they are injectors. Well, what did you find out about that group? Did they have similarities? Were they very different?
They were different, I have to say, Jim. They did stand out, mainly because the people that were self-injecting Botox and dermal fillers were taking huge risks, because they were ordering kits online from various places. They were doing a lot of experimenting at home with mixing, say, part of a substance, we'll call it, because, you know, when obviously we know when we buy online, how do you know what's in it? But a substance that's similar to, say, collagen or whatever is injected into, you know, dermal fillers, whatever's injected, and because of a certain amount, they would mix that with something from another kit, and they'd be doing some what we call kitchen chemistry, you know, manufacturing the kits at home, more or less, and then using YouTube videos and online guides to show them where to inject in their own faces. And the problems with that arose more significant than, say, the Melanotan, people that injected Melanotan, because filler can migrate. So where you initially put it, it may not stay there, you know, so you can get things like deformities in the face, hard nodules in the face that are very difficult to break down. And then, of course, there's like the presenting to a healthcare practitioner with that, you know, is significant. People are not likely to, well, they some did, others were reticent to go and say, look, I've been doing this for years now, I've got this problem with how my face looks, what can I do? So yeah, that was one paper that came out of that piece that was worthy of a paper itself. But we also worked on a paper together, Jim, recently about injecting fillers, DIY injecting fillers in the body as well.
Yeah.
And that was interesting too. All the different substances, including mechanical oils, you know, from cars and things like that people are injecting into their bodies to change how they look. And I think it really just underscores how important body image has become, how important it is, how far people are prepared to take it, you know. And
what struck me with it was the volume in some cases that people were putting in, and I suppose, I mean, I'm an outsider to all these communities, but I suppose the steps where people were putting, you know, multiple liters into one muscle group, it was quite, you know, as a researcher, you try to be non-judgmental, but sometimes you can be shocked, and I found some of that.
I mean, I think shocking. Like, obviously everybody has their own subjective idea of attractiveness, and not everybody wants to conform to mainstream ideals, and they have their own idea of what looks good, or what you know, what their way they want their body to be. So in one way, I admire that, in that I would encourage people to be true to themselves and be unique in what they think is attractive, and not try and be what everybody else looks like. But you also have to consider things like mental health. Some people are vulnerable for a lot of reasons, whether it's trauma. Like, people manage trauma in so many different ways, Jim. Like, if there's one area of their lives that they can control, or even use to disassociate from past trauma, that could be a symptom. That could easily be a symptom of somebody that's struggling with emotional issues or past life experiences, and that's just using that as a sort of a disassociation technique, you know.
Yeah.
So that's something we need to.
And with the internet as well, where you can always find like-minded people, no matter how much of a sort of minority pursuit, and you can get that sort of micro-normalization, as you were mentioning before, within that group. That's
it. Yeah, you get people that you'll find like-minded people, and all of a sudden then there's that psychological aspect of, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We all need to belong. We all need to feel accepted somewhere. So if somebody is particularly vulnerable and they come across a community where they fit in and people are doing similar activities, then that's going to be attractive in itself. And that's completely understandable, because we all need to belong to a group. That's part of being alive. Like, we can't survive. We're pack animals. So the psychological aspect of that as well, I think, is important to include for healthcare practitioners, when rather than taking the hard line of this is deleterious for your health, stop doing it. It's more about exploring, what is this giving you? Like what is going on for you that this is helping you with? Because there's a purpose to everything. There's a purpose to every behavior, and people don't do things unless there's some kind of a payoff. And I think it's to find out what that is. And oftentimes it's psychological, and it's some kind of void that's being filled by an unusual behavior. And that's not, I'm not counting myself as an outsider looking in when I talk like this, Jim. I'm very much including myself in humanity, because that's all very normal and natural. That's not pathological. Like we're all vulnerable to that. We all have our weak areas, you know, the areas where we're vulnerable. So that's perfectly normal. We all deal with it in different ways.
I think that's a really good point, and it's a good one to end on, because I think as researchers and practitioners, it's our duty to, I suppose, explore it and make sure that if the practices that people engage in, you know, let's try and make it as safe as possible for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks very much for that. I found it really fascinating talking to you, and I hope to get you on here again at some point in the future. Thanks very much, Rebekah.
Happy to.